Chase Morgan was the only son of Richard Morgan, one of the richest men in the city. They lived in a mansion with over 20 rooms, a swimming pool, a private theater, and even a gold piano that no one played. Chase had everything money could buy: designer shoes, luxury watches, the latest phone every year, and his own driver. But there was one thing Chase never had: peace. At school, he was called the rich dumb kid. He was 16 but had failed almost every subject since he was 13. His teachers didn't expect much from him anymore. Some classmates tried to be his friends, but most just stayed away. They thought he was proud. But really, Chase was just scared. His father never had time for him. Mr. Morgan was always busy with business meetings, travel, or parties when he did talk to Chase. It was only to ask about his grades, and Chase always had the same answer. He failed again one morning. After getting another test paper marked with a big red F, Chase was called into his father's office at home. The room was full of dark wood, heavy books, and the smell of cigar smoke. Mr. Morgan sat behind a large desk, looking cold and tired. "I'm done watching you waste everything, Mr. Morgan said. "I give you the best school, the best tutors, the best life, and you give me nothing back." Chase said nothing, just looked at the floor. "I won't let you ruin the family name," his father continued. "This is your final chance, Chase. You pass this semester, or you're out. No car, no card, no inheritance." "You live on your own like a man," Chase nodded slowly. But inside he was shaking. He didn't know how to fix himself. He didn't know how to be someone his father could be proud of. That night, Chase sat alone in his room. He looked at the walls covered in posters, video game consoles, and unused books. He had everything. Yet he felt like he had nothing. He tried to study, but the words danced on the page like a cruel joke. Nothing made sense. Nothing stayed in his head. He felt stupid, like he didn't belong in this world of pressure and perfection. The next day at school, Chase walked through the hallways like a ghost. He avoided eye contact, ignored the whispers, and went straight to the back of the library. There, in the quiet, he could breathe. But even in silence, the pain stayed. He covered his face with his hands, his fingers trembling, and that's when he heard a slow, calm voice behind him. "Rough day, son?" Chase looked up quickly, surprised. It was Mr. Elijah, the school janitor. He was an older black man, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. He held a mop in one hand and a small smile on his face. Chase forced a smile back. "Something like that," he said quietly. "Mr. Elijah walked over and sat on a nearby chair. "I've seen you in this corner before," he said. "Every time after a test. Your shoulders drop like the world's on your back." Chase didn't know what to say. No adult had ever talked to him like this. Like they actually saw him. "You're not dumb. You know," Mr. Elijah added. "You're just not learning the right way yet." Chase blinked, unsure if he heard right. "No one's ever said that to me," he whispered. "Well," Mr. Elijah said with a smile, "maybe it's time someone did." The bell rang in the distance, and Chase stood up to leave. "Thanks," he said softly. "I gotta go, Mr. Elijah nodded. "Anytime, son, you ever feel lost again? Come find me. I cleaned this school, but I've cleaned up worse messes than grades." Chase walked away, but his heart felt lighter. It was the first time in a long time someone didn't judge him. Someone just spoke to him like he mattered that night. He kept thinking about the janitor's words. "You're not dumb. You're just not learning the right way yet." What did that even mean? For the first time, Chase wanted to know, not because of his father's threat, but because someone believed there was more to him than an F on paper. He didn't know it yet, but that one short talk in the library was going to change everything. Chase tried to focus during class, but his mind kept drifting back to Mr. Elijah's words. The janitor had spoken with such calm and kindness, not like a teacher or a parent, but like someone who understood what it felt like to fall. No one had ever told Chase that he was more than his grades. It stayed with him, like a small light in a very dark tunnel, but light didn't stop the pressure from growing. Every subject still felt like a wall too high to climb. Even when he tried his best, the numbers and facts refused to stay in his head. His teachers looked at him with tired eyes, like they had already given up. At home, it wasn't any better. His father barely spoke to him after their last meeting. His mother had moved to another city years ago, starting a new life without him. So Chase lived in a golden cage, rich on the outside, empty on the inside. He felt broken, like a prince who had everything except the ability to win, and it hurt more than anyone could see. One Thursday afternoon, after failing yet another math test, Chase walked out of class without saying a word. His chest felt heavy, his hands were shaking, and he couldn't breathe properly. He passed the noisy lunchroom, ignored the loud jokes in the hallway, and walked down to the basement level. No one came here much except the janitor. There, in the quiet smell of floor polish and dust, Chase sat down against the wall. He put his head in his hands, trying to stop the wave of anger and shame crashing over him. He felt useless, like he didn't deserve the name Morgan anymore. A soft sound of wheels rolling broke the silence. It was Mr. Elijah, pushing his cart filled with brooms and cleaning bottles. He looked down at Chase and didn't ask questions. He just sat beside him. Not too close, not too far, just enough to say, "I'm here," after a long pause. Mr. Elijah finally spoke. "You don't look so good." "Son," Chase laughed bitterly, "I don't feel good either." "What happened today?" the janitor asked, keeping his voice low and calm. Chase didn't answer right away. Then he mumbled, "I failed again. I studied all night." "And still failed, mister." Elijah nodded slowly, like he'd heard this before. "Tell me something," he said. "When you fall off a bike, what do you do?" Chase frowned. "I don't know, get up, I guess." "Exactly," the old man said. "And then?" "Try again," Chase replied, confused. "Mister," Elijah smiled. "So why don't we treat school the same way?" Chase stared at him. "Because if I fail here, I lose everything." The janitor leaned back against the wall, his eyes soft. "Maybe, or maybe you lose nothing but pride. And maybe that's a good thing." Chase didn't know how to respond. No one had ever talked about pride like it was something to let go of. "You know," Mr. Elijah said, "I wasn't always a janitor." Chase looked at him, surprised. "Really?" The old man chuckled. "Really? I wanted to be a teacher once, but life didn't go that way. I made mistakes, some big ones, but I learned something important. The world will always test you, but not always with books." Chase listened. Really listened. For once, the words didn't feel like pressure. They felt like truth. "What do you want, Chase?" the janitor asked. "Not what your father wants, not what the world expects. What do you want?" Chase opened his mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked him that before. He thought about it deeply, slowly. I want to feel proud of myself," he said finally. "Just once. I want to succeed at something and know it was me who did it, Mr. Elijah nodded. "Good. That's a start. Now we just need to find your way of learning. Not the school's way, not your father's way. Your way," Chase looked at him. A small flicker of hope in his eyes. "You'd help me." "I already am," Mr. Elijah smiled, "but only if you're willing to try again." Chase stood up and wiped his eyes. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll try again." The janitor gave him a gentle pat on the back. "That's all life asks, son. Keep trying. And the lesson will find you." That day, something small but powerful changed inside Chase. He still had no plan, no big answers. But he had one thing he didn't have yesterday, a reason to keep going. He walked back upstairs, the noise of the school surrounding him again. But this time, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like a beginner, and that was a whole new start. The next morning, Chase walked through the school halls with a quiet sense of purpose. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't hiding either. His eyes searched the floor for a mop bucket or a janitor's cart. Somehow, Mr. Elijah's words still echoed in his mind, and he wasn't ready to forget them. He found him near the gym, sweeping the hallway with steady, slow movements, mister. Elijah looked up and nodded, his eyes warm like always. "You came back," he said simply. Chase nodded. "I said I'd try again, didn't want to break my word." "Good," the janitor said, leaning on the broom handle. "Most people think trying again is weakness, but it's the opposite." They walked together for a bit. "No rush, no pressure, mister," Elijah talked while he cleaned, and Chase listened without feeling judged. It felt like a secret classroom no one else knew about. "Let me tell you something about this place," Mr. Elijah began. "These floors see everything. The kids who win medals, the ones who cry in the bathroom, even the ones who think they're invisible. Like me," Chase said softly. Mr. Elijah stopped sweeping and looked at him with kind, serious eyes. "You're not invisible, son. You're just hiding in plain sight." That sentence stayed with Chase the whole day. He looked around his classes with new eyes. Not afraid this time, but curious. He began to notice how some kids took notes differently, how others asked for help without shame. For the first time, he realized everyone had their own way of surviving school. After class, he went to the library. Not to escape, but to think. He found a quiet corner again, but this time he brought a notebook. He made a list titled, "What I Don't Understand." He wrote down every topic that confused him. Algebra formulas, science terms, even long grammar rules. As he looked at the list, it felt like a mountain, but it also felt real. At least now he could see what he was up against. That evening, he found Mr. Elijah mopping the cafeteria. Chase walked up slowly and held out the notebook. "I made a list," he said, "of everything that makes me feel dumb, mister." Elijah dried his hands with a towel and took the notebook. He read it carefully, nodding after each line. Then he looked up and smiled. "This list means you're smarter than you think," he said. "How?" Chase asked, confused. "Because dumb people don't ask questions. Some dumb people pretend they know everything. You, on the other hand, are starting to learn." Chase felt something shift inside his chest, like a heavy door creaking open. No teacher had ever made him feel like this, and not small, but possible. "All right," Mr. Elijah said. "Let's start with just one thing from your list." "Not all of it, just one." Chase pointed to algebra. "This one's always been the worst." "Okay," the janitor replied. "Then let's make it make sense." They sat at one of the empty tables. Mr. Elijah used a napkin and a pen to draw out numbers and letters. He didn't explain it like a textbook. He used real life. He said, "Think of X as a mystery number, like the number of shoes in your closet." Suddenly, it wasn't scary anymore. It was simple, even kind of funny. By the time they finished the first example, Chase had solved it, not perfectly but correctly. His eyes widened. "Wait, I actually got it," Mr. Elijah smiled. "Of course you did. I never doubted it. Why did you?" Chase didn't have an answer for that. Maybe because no one ever told him he could. Maybe because he was always afraid to ask that night. Chase walked into his room and looked around. He saw all the things money had bought. Games, gadgets, gold-colored headphones. But none of those things gave him the feeling he had in the cafeteria. The feeling of understanding something for the first time. He sat down and opened his school books. He looked at them not like enemies, but puzzles he might one day solve. It didn't feel easy, but it didn't feel impossible either. For the next few days, he kept meeting Mr. Elijah after school. Each time, they picked one thing from the list, and each time, the janitor made it feel like Chase could learn. Not because he was lucky, but because he was trying. The janitor never rushed, never scolded. He just watched with eyes full of quiet belief. One day, Chase asked him, "Why are you helping me?" Mr. Elijah paused, then said, "Because someone helped me once, and I promised I'd pass it on." Chase nodded slowly. He didn't know who had helped the janitor, but he knew one thing for sure. Now he wanted to pass it on too. Someday, the janitor's eyes weren't just kind. They were full of wisdom, and for the first time, Chase was learning how to see the world and himself through those eyes. Every afternoon after school, while most students rushed home or gathered in noisy groups, Chase stayed behind. He would meet Mr. Elijah near the back hallway, where the janitor's closet stood like a forgotten little room. It smelled like old soap, worn-out wood, and time itself to most. It was just a storage space, but to Chase, it was turning into a classroom of truth. Mr. Elijah never brought out textbooks. Instead, he brought out stories. Each lesson started with something simple, a math formula, a grammar rule, a question from Chase's list, and ended with a story from life. "Let me tell you something, mister," Elijah said one afternoon as he wiped his hands on a rag. "I once failed 8th grade twice. I thought I'd never get past it." Chase's eyes widened. "You failed?" "Sure did," the janitor said with a chuckle. "Back then, I thought failing made me a failure. But that's not true, son. Failing just means you're still learning." They sat on 2 old stools while the mop bucket sat in the middle like a silent student. Chase opened his notebook and showed his latest assignment. He had gotten a C instead of an F. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best grade he'd seen in a long time. Mr. Elijah smiled big. "Look at that." "That's progress," Chase smiled too, a little shy. "Do you really think I can pass this semester?" Mr. Elijah looked him straight in the eye. "I know you can, but not just because of your grades. Because you're changing the way you think." That sentence made Chase pause. He had never thought about how he thought. He always blamed the system, his teachers, even his dad. But now, he was starting to see his own part in the story. That week, Mr. Elijah shared a lesson that Chase never forgot. It started when he spilled a bottle of cleaner by accident. The liquid spread across the floor fast. Chase panicked, trying to stop it with paper towels. Mr. Elijah calmly handed him a mop and said, "You see this mess? It's just like life. If you freeze or panic, the mess spreads. But if you act with calm and care, you clean it little by little," Chase mopped slowly. Watching how the dirty water disappeared with every stroke, it felt strangely powerful. He looked at the janitor and asked, "Did you always want to clean floors?" Mr. Elijah laughed gently. "No, son. I wanted to be a pilot. I used to stare at the sky all day as a kid. But life had other plans. My mom got sick, I had to work, dreams had to wait," Chase nodded. "So, are you sad you didn't make it?" The janitor thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but I also know I still fly. Just not in the sky, I fly when I help someone find their wings." That hit Chase deep. It wasn't about the job, it was about the impact, and Mr. Elijah was making more impact than any rich man he knew. After that day, Chase stopped seeing Mr. Elijah as just a janitor. He started seeing him as a teacher, a mentor, and maybe even something like a friend. Their lessons became a daily ritual. Sometimes they talked about schoolwork. Other times they just talked about fear, purpose, or what it means to try again after falling. One day, Mr. Elijah brought a folded newspaper with an old photo in it. It showed a young black man standing outside a broken-down house, holding a diploma. "That's me," he said with a proud smile. "Took me 10 years to get that paper, but I got it." Chase studied the picture. "You never gave up," he said quietly. "No, son, I just took longer than most, but I got there my way. That's what matters." That evening, Chase went home and pulled out every failed test he'd hidden in drawers and under his bed. He laid them on the floor one by one instead of shame. He saw something new, a trail, a record of where he had been and where he refused to stay. He took a marker and wrote on the back of one test, "Learning is not about getting it right. It's about not quitting." The next morning, Chase walked into school early. He wasn't just coming to survive another day. He was coming to grow. As he passed the janitor's closet, he knocked twice on the door. "Inside, mister." Elijah was already waiting with 2 stools, a warm smile and a lesson ready to begin. In that little space filled with brooms and buckets, Chase was learning how to clean up the most important mess, the one inside himself. And every mop stroke, every small victory, was building something stronger than grades. It was building character. Days turned into weeks, and Chase was no longer the same boy who used to hide in the back of the library. He still struggled with some subjects, but now he faced them instead of running away. He asked questions in class, stayed late after school, and most importantly, he kept meeting Mr. Elijah. The janitor's closet had become a safe place, not just for learning formulas or writing essays, but for growing as a person. Sometimes they didn't even touch school books. They just talked about life, choices, and what it really means to be strong. One rainy afternoon, Chase sat quietly on the stool. Staring at a blank sheet of paper, Mr. Elijah was wiping a mop. But he noticed the boy's silence. "What's bothering you today?" he asked gently. Chase sighed. "I still feel like I'm not good enough. Like no matter how hard I try, I'll always be behind." The janitor put the mop aside and sat across from him. He looked Chase in the eyes and said, "You're ready for the secret now?" Chase blinked. "What secret?" "The one that changed my life," Mr. Elijah said with a nod. "The one that helped me stop seeing failure as the end." Chase leaned in closer, heart beating faster. This wasn't just another lesson, and it felt deeper. "Wiser, mister," Elijah spoke slowly. "The world teaches us that success means winning, getting the highest score, the biggest job, the most applause. But that's a lie. Success isn't about being first. It's about being real." Chase looked confused. "Real?" "Yeah," the old man said. "Real with yourself, real with your story, real with your journey." He pointed at the mop bucket. "That mop? It doesn't care who pushes it, but I do it with care, with pride. That's success." He leaned forward, eyes shining. "You want to know the real test? It's not math or history. It's this: can you fail, fall, get laughed at, feel like giving up, and still try again the next day? That's the test." Chase's chest tightened. No one had ever put it that way before. He had always seen failure as proof that he was dumb, but Mr. Elijah was saying the opposite, that trying again was strength, not weakness. "I've failed so many times," Chase whispered. "And yet," the janitor smiled, "here you are." Chase felt something shift inside him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful, like a seed had been planted in his heart. The secret wasn't a trick or a shortcut. It was a truth, one that required courage, patience, and honesty. That night, Chase didn't study because he had to. He studied because he wanted to. Not for his father's approval, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove something right inside himself. He created flashcards, rewrote notes, and even taught himself by explaining problems out loud. Sometimes he got things wrong, but instead of quitting, he simply tried again. One evening, he walked past a group of boys laughing in the hallway. One of them smirked and said, "Look, the rich failure is trying to be smart now." Chase paused, looked at them and smiled calmly. "Yeah," he said, "I am. And I'll keep trying, even if I fail. That's what smart people do." Then he walked away, leaving them speechless. That was the first time he felt proud. Not for getting something right, but for choosing to rise later that week. His science teacher called him aside after class. "Chase," she said, holding his quiz, "this is the best score you've had all year. What changed?" He smiled and said, "I stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to learn." She nodded, impressed, and for the first time she saw not just effort, but growth. When Chase told Mr. Elijah the news, the janitor didn't cheer loudly. He just gave him a quiet, strong nod. "I told you the secret would work," he said. Chase smiled wide. "It's not even a secret, really." "Exactly," said Mr. Elijah. "It's just something most people forget." That weekend, Chase sat by his bedroom window and thought about everything. His father still hadn't said anything encouraging. The pressure still existed, but Chase had changed. He wasn't trying to escape the weight anymore. He was learning to carry it, one step, one lesson, one breath at a time, and deep inside, he knew. The real exam wasn't on paper, it was in how he chose to live. Chase began to change in ways that surprised even himself. The boy who used to skip class and hide behind excuses was now showing up early, asking questions and even helping others. He still made mistakes, but now he took them as part of the process, not the end of the road. His classmates started noticing. Some rolled their eyes, thinking it was just another rich kid act. But others saw something different in Chase, a quiet effort, a steady climb. He no longer walked with his head down. He walked like someone who had finally met himself. His teachers, once frustrated, now looked at him with curiosity. They saw the effort, the small improvements, the spark behind his questions. And even if he didn't top the class, they could no longer ignore his growth. At lunch, Chase no longer sat alone one day. A shy boy from his English class asked if Chase could explain a paragraph they had read. Chase did slowly and simply the way Mr. Elijah had explained things to him. "Thanks," the boy said. "You make it sound easy," Chase smiled. "It's not easy, but it gets easier when someone believes you can do it." That night, Chase told Mr. Elijah what had happened. The janitor grinned. "Told you. When you light your own candle, it can help others see too, mister." Elijah had become more than just a mentor. He was now part of Chase's story, the part that didn't have gold, but had value. But while Chase was rising, his father was watching from a distance. Mr. Morgan still didn't say much. He noticed Chase was home earlier, spending less time on video games and more time reading or writing. But he said nothing. One evening, Chase entered his father's study, holding his latest report card. It wasn't perfect, a few C's, one B, and even one A, but there were no F's. For the first time in years, there were no failing marks. His father looked at the paper, then looked at him. He didn't smile, just said, "So you finally decided to take things seriously?" Chase didn't flinch. He nodded and replied, "No, I finally decided to take myself seriously." His father raised an eyebrow. Chase added, "I'm not doing this to prove anything to you anymore. I'm doing it because I want to live a life that means something." There was a long silence, mister. Morgan leaned back in his chair. Unsure what to say, finally he asked, "Who taught you that?" Chase smiled gently. "A janitor," his father laughed bitterly. "You let a janitor teach you how to live?" Chase nodded with quiet pride. "Yes, sir. And I've learned more from him than from any of your tutors." His father didn't respond. Chase turned and walked away, feeling strong, not because he had won an argument, but because he had stood in truth. The next day at school, Chase handed out copies of his notes to a few students who had been struggling. He didn't do it to show off. He did it because he remembered what it felt like to be lost. Later that afternoon, he asked Mr. Elijah a question he had been holding back for weeks. "Why do you care so much?" The janitor put down his mop, sat on a bucket, and looked at him. "Because someone once cared about me when no one else did," he said. "And I promised I'd pass that on to someone who needed it." Chase felt a lump in his throat. What if I hadn't listened? Mr. Elijah smiled. You were always listening, son. You just didn't know it yet. By now, the janitor wasn't just teaching him how to study. He was teaching him how to live, with purpose, with patience. And with pride that didn't depend on money or praise, Chase began keeping a journal, writing down not just school lessons but life lessons. He called it the bucket book. On the first page, he wrote the words, fall 7 times, stand up 8. He shared some pages with classmates, and soon others started asking to read more. Chase never imagined people would want to learn from him. But it wasn't because he was special. It was because he had changed. Mr. Elijah once said, true change is quiet, like a seed growing under the ground, but one day it breaks through the soil and surprises everyone, even itself. And now Chase was blooming, not because he had everything, but because he had learned what matters. He wasn't trying to be the smartest, the richest, or the best. He was just trying to be better than yesterday, and for the first time, that was enough. The final weeks of the school year arrived. The air was filled with nervous energy. Final exams and talk of awards. For most students, it was just another year ending. But for Chase, it felt like the start of a new chapter. He had passed all his classes, not with straight A's, but with honest effort and real understanding. To him, those grades meant more than any trophy his father had ever brought home from a business trip. Chase no longer sat in the shadows. He walked with quiet confidence, helping students when he could, sharing notes, and even leading a small study group. Some still teased him, but their voices didn't matter anymore, because he knew who he was becoming one afternoon. A notice was posted in the school hallway. It listed the students who would be recognized at the end-of-year assembly. Chase wasn't expecting to see his name, but there it was, under a new category. Most Improved Student of the Year, Chase Morgan. He stood frozen for a moment, then slowly smiled, not because of the award, but because someone had seen him that night. He told Mr. Elijah, who was wiping down cafeteria tables. The janitor looked up, eyes proud, and gave a small nod. You earned it, not just in class, but in life. Chase felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say thank you, but words felt small compared to what this man had done for him, so instead, he handed him something. A small black notebook with the words bucket book written on the cover. I want you to have it, Chase said. It has all your lessons inside. I wrote them down. Maybe one day, someone else will need them like I did, mister. Elijah took the book carefully, like it was made of gold. He flipped through the pages, reading the simple truths written in Chase's hand. Then he closed it and said softly, You've already passed the real test. The day of the assembly arrived. Parents filled the auditorium. Teachers lined the stage, and students sat in neat rows. Chase's father sat in the back, arms crossed, face unreadable. He hadn't said a word when Chase told him about the award, but he had shown up, and for Chase, that was enough. The principal called names one by one, and students walked across the stage to receive their certificates. When Chase's name was called, a quiet buzz moved through the room. Some were surprised, some were impressed, and some still didn't believe it. Chase walked to the stage not with pride, but with peace. He accepted the certificate, shook the principal's hand, then took the microphone for a moment. Most of you know me as the kid who failed a lot, Chase began. He paused, hearing small laughs and whispers. But what most of you don't know, he continued, is that I didn't just learn how to pass a test. I learned how to believe in myself. He held up the certificate, then looked out at the crowd. There's one person who helped me when no one else did. Someone who taught me that failure is not the end. The room went quiet. Chase smiled and said, He's not a teacher on paper, but he's the best teacher I've ever had. His name is Mr. Elijah, our school janitor. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Heads turned, eyes searched, and finally landed on the man standing quietly near the exit with his cleaning cart. Everyone clapped. Slowly at first. Then louder, Mr. Elijah stood still, surprised, his eyes watering as the students and staff gave him a standing ovation. Chase stepped down from the stage and walked straight to him. He hugged him in front of everyone, not caring what they thought, because to him, this man was family. After the assembly, Mr. Morgan approached them. He looked at Chase, then turned to Mr. Elijah. You're the janitor my son's been talking about? He asked bluntly. Mr. Elijah nodded. Yes, sir. That's me. The billionaire looked him up and down, and for a moment, it seemed like he would say something dismissive. But instead, he said, You've done something I couldn't. Then he looked at his son. You've changed, Chase replied. No, Dad. I just finally became who I was meant to be, Mr. Morgan didn't smile, but he nodded slightly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed Mr. Elijah a business card. If you ever want something more than cleaning this place, call me, mister. Elijah took the card but didn't respond. He didn't need a fancy job title to feel valuable. He had already changed a life, and that was more than enough. That evening, as the sun set behind the school, Chase and Mr. Elijah stood outside quietly. The wind was soft, the sky painted with gold. You gave me my life back, Chase said. No, son, Mr. Elijah replied. You took it back. I just handed you the broom. Years passed like pages turning in a book. Chase Morgan was no longer the lost teenager hiding in school hallways. He had grown into a man with purpose in his steps and kindness in his heart. Not perfect, but steady, not the best at everything. But honest in all things. After high school, he got into a small college, not because of his family's money, but because of his efforts. He studied education, wanting to one day teach others like he had been taught, not just in classrooms, but in life. He never forgot who had changed his path. Mr. Elijah, now retired, lived quietly in a small house on the edge of town. He spent his days tending to a garden, reading books, and visiting a local community center. He said he was finally at peace one summer. Chase visited him with a surprise. They sat in the shade of a big tree, lemonade in hand. Chase reached into his bag and pulled out a flyer. It read, "The Elijah Scholarship for students who refuse to give up, Mr." Elijah read the words slowly, his hands trembling just a little. You started a scholarship? He asked, voice low. Chase nodded. Yeah. I saved up from my part-time jobs and added a donation from my dad's company. It's for kids who are failing but still trying. The ones who need someone to believe in them. The old janitor smiled. Eyes moist. You remembered, he whispered. I never forgot, Chase replied. You were the first person who saw something in me when I couldn't see it myself. They sat in silence for a while, letting the moment speak. The wind rustled the leaves gently, as if blessing the moment. Later that year, Chase gave his first speech at a school assembly. Not as a student, but as a guest speaker. He told his story, the struggles, the failures, the lessons, and the janitor who changed everything. He ended the speech with the same line Mr. Elijah once told him. The real test is not on paper. It's in your heart. The students clapped, and many stood in line to talk to him afterward. Some were curious, others were inspired, but one young boy stood out. He had tears in his eyes and said, I fail all the time, but after hearing you, I want to try again. Chase bent down and looked him in the eye. That means you've already passed the first part of the test. Later, he mailed a copy of his speech to Mr. Elijah, along with a thank you note and a photo of the scholarship winners. Each face in the photo had a different story, but they all had one thing in common. Someone had believed in them. Mr. Elijah put the photo on his wall. Right next to his old high school diploma, below it, he taped a message Chase had once written in the bucket book. Fall 7 times. Stand up 8. Years later, when Mr. Elijah passed away peacefully in his sleep, the town remembered him not as the janitor, but as a man who had shaped futures without needing a title. His funeral was simple but full of love. Students he had helped showed up with flowers and stories. Teachers shared quiet tears and smiles, and Chase gave the final speech. He stood beside the casket and said, Mr. Elijah never stood behind a teacher's desk, but he taught the greatest lessons I ever learned. He didn't wear a suit or carry a briefcase, but he carried wisdom wherever he went. He taught me that success isn't about being first. It's about rising when you fall, trying when you're tired, and believing even when no one else does. He paused, his voice soft but clear. I'm not here today because I passed a math test. I'm here because one man showed me I was more than my failures. And now I pass that lesson on to others. After the funeral, Chase continued his journey. He became a teacher, then a school counselor. He created a free program for at-risk students, using the same lessons he learned in the janitor's closet. One day, a reporter interviewed him for a magazine and asked, What inspired you the most? Chase smiled and replied, A janitor, a mop, and a life-changing secret. The reporter laughed gently, thinking it was a joke, but Chase didn't laugh. He looked out the window and said, Sometimes, the people we overlook are the ones who hold the key to our future, and he meant every word. Because long ago, in a dusty hallway filled with silence and failure, a janitor had passed him not just a mop, but a light that now lived on in every student Chase helped, and that, more than grades, awards, or money, was the real legacy, the real test, the real victory.